"Excuse me, this is my seat," the young black girl said gently, holding her first-class ticket. The white man smirked, refusing to move. The flight attendant, without even checking, ordered the girl to find a seat in economy. Passengers watched in silence as a flush of shame rose on the girl's young face. In those tense moments, no one, especially not the crew, realized she wasn't just any passenger. She was the daughter of a billionaire, someone with enough influence to ground every plane in this airline's fleet. And she was about to make a phone call that would change everything. What began as a minor confrontation held the seeds of a major crisis. A story that would expose deep-rooted prejudice and challenge powers that once seemed untouchable. Seconds later, a violent shudder ran through the plane. The captain's voice came over the cabin speaker, chilling in its finality. "This aircraft will return to the gate. Security will board." Amara Jenkins, age 11, felt every eye on the plane turn to her. A sea of strangers suddenly united in judgment. Tears threatened at the corners of her eyes as she stood frozen in the aisle, her boarding pass clenched in a trembling hand, clearly marked 2A. Her seat is now occupied by a grumpy middle-aged man who refuses to look at anyone but the flight attendant. "I paid for first class," he growled. "I won't give up my seat for some disruption." The word disruption hung in the air, heavy with malice. Amara's father, Marcus Jenkins, stood protectively beside her. His usual calm is now a storm barely contained. "My daughter's seat," he said, voice tightly restrained, "was purchased weeks ago. She has the boarding pass to prove it." The flight attendant's face betrayed confusion as she looked between father and daughter, while whispers rippled through the cabin. What no one yet realized was that in just 4 minutes, this petty dispute would escalate into a life-altering moment and reveal truths some passengers had spent their whole lives hiding. This minor confrontation, like a droplet rolling down a cliff face, would set off an avalanche no one saw coming, uncovering secrets and long-established moral choices. But to understand how we got here, how an 11-year-old black girl, who quietly built a billion-dollar tech empire from her bedroom, became the center of a confrontation that would later dominate national headlines, we have to go back to the beginning of that day, to the quiet of the Jenkins household. The American dream sometimes begins in the humblest of places, and Amara Jenkins is living proof. She wasn't a fluke. She was the product of persistence, vision, and a strong family foundation, ingredients often overlooked in the face of meteoric success. The alarm buzzed softly at 4:30 a.m. Amara was already awake, sleep elusive before a big meeting. Her room looked like any other child's at first glance. Stuffed animals lined the windowsill. Science fair ribbons pinned to a corkboard. A bookshelf overflowing with dog-eared paperbacks. It was a carefully protected childhood, shielded from the pressure of the outside world. But the sleek computer setup in the corner told a different story. 3 monitors displayed scrolling code, financial forecasts, and user metrics for Dreamscape, the educational gaming platform Amara had created at age 9, now used in schools across 47 countries. It wasn't just a game. It was a revolution in learning, a bridge to knowledge for millions of young minds around the world. "Big day, little sparrow," Marcus Jenkins said, appearing in the doorway holding 2 steaming mugs. The childhood nickname still suited her somehow, a small, quick-witted girl with a hidden reservoir of strength. Amara gratefully took the hot chocolate. "I'm nervous," she admitted. "Suency's investors are conservative. They're expecting someone else." Marcus sat on the edge of her bed, forgetting his coffee as he studied her face. At 48, he had learned to read the subtle signs of worry in his daughter. The way she tucked her hair behind her ears, the faint line between her brows. "They're expecting someone who doesn't look like you," Amara clarified, locking eyes with him. It was their unspoken understanding, the truth they lived with daily in the world of tech and finance. A black girl from Detroit wasn't who people imagined when they heard tech billionaire. Then today's the day their expectations get reorganized, Marcus said simply. A former electrical engineer who had quit his job to support his daughter's growing company, he had learned that sometimes the most powerful thing he could do was name the truth without letting it become a barrier. You're not walking into that room to prove you belong. You're walking in because they need what you've built. Amara nodded, drawing strength from the quiet certainty in her father's voice. In the soft morning light, wearing NASA pajamas and holding a well-loved stuffed penguin from age 3, she looked like any other kid. Few would guess that the algorithm she'd developed in this very room had revolutionized how struggling learners accessed educational material, or that her company had crossed the billion-dollar mark 6 months ago. It was a staggering achievement, a testament to the limitless potential of intellect and creativity. "San Francisco, here we come," she said, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. But something about this trip felt different, though she couldn't say why. As Marcus helped her gather the last of her things, neither of them knew just how prophetic that unease would be. 2 hours later, Detroit Metropolitan Airport buzzed with early travelers. The Jenkinses moved quickly through security, a well-practiced routine from frequent business trips. Amara's passport bore stamps from Tokyo, London, and Singapore, proof of presentations, conferences, and partner meetings that had taken her around the world. Today's meeting with SUNTC Ventures could mean extending Dreamscape's reach to underserved communities worldwide, a mission that made the exhausting travel worth it. "Dad, did you remember the USB with my presentation?" Amara asked, suddenly pausing in the terminal. Marcus patted his breast pocket with a knowing smile. "Right here, plus a backup in my carry-on and another in the cloud. Triple redundancy, just like you taught me." This small exchange, child reminding, parent reassuring, captured their unique dynamic. Their roles shifted and blended constantly. Sometimes Marcus was the protective father. Sometimes he was the COO supporting the visionary CEO. They'd learned to switch seamlessly between these identities, each filling in where the other left off. At the boarding gate, Amara reviewed her presentation notes while Marcus called their driver in San Francisco. Around them, the familiar airport chaos played out. Business people hunched over laptops. Families wrangled excited children. Solo travelers are buried in books or podcasts. No one paid much attention to the unassuming father-daughter pair, and that was exactly how they liked it. Amara's company had been profiled in business magazines and tech blogs, but they were careful to protect her privacy, limiting photos and public appearances. She wanted the world to focus on her innovations, not her age or appearance. Group A now boarding for Flight 1982 to San Francisco. The announcement rang out. Marcus packed up as Amara slipped her tablet into her backpack. "Ready, little sparrow?" he asked, the question meaning more than just lining up. Amara took a deep breath, squared her shoulders under her neatly tailored blazer, clearly designed for a child yet exuding authority, and nodded. "Ready?" They lined up, boarding passes in hand. Amara's ticket read 2A, a first-class window seat. Though Marcus could easily afford 2 first-class tickets, he had deliberately booked himself in economy, 3 rows behind the divider. These small decisions were part of the careful balance they maintained, providing Amara the comfort she needed for high-stakes business trips while teaching her the value of money and privilege. "I'll be right behind you if you need anything," Marcus reminded her as they reached the front of the line. "Just hit the call button or text me." Amara nodded, standing tall as she handed her ticket to the gate agent. There was a subtle shift in her posture now, a calm settling over her like a cloak. Marcus recognized it as her business mode, the same poised presence she carried into boardrooms and investor meetings. "Welcome aboard, Miss Jenkins," the agent said, scanning her ticket with a warm smile that only slightly faltered at the passenger's age. "Have a great flight to San Francisco." Amara thanked her politely and stepped onto the jet bridge, unaware that the carefully controlled world she and her father had built was about to collide with forces they couldn't anticipate. Because no matter her extraordinary achievements, the wealth she had created, or the lives her technology had improved, to some people boarding Flight 1382 today, Amara Jenkins would never be more than what they saw at first glance, a black child in a space they had decided she didn't belong. It was a prejudice as old as time, an invisible wall that talent and success still struggled to break. First class on Flight 1382 gleamed with the quiet luxury of leather seats and generous legroom. Amara walked confidently to seat 2A, her small rolling bag trailing behind her. She had flown often enough to execute the rituals of air travel with ease. Where to stow her bag, how to adjust her seat, the polite nods exchanged with flight attendants. 3 rows back in economy, Marcus watched his daughter take her seat, that familiar mix of pride and worry stirring in his chest. Every time she stepped beyond his protection, he felt it, that lump in his throat, that silent prayer that the world would see her the way he did. Brilliant, worthy, and so much more than the sum of others' expectations. Boarding continued. A distinguished woman in her 60s took the aisle seat across from Amara, offering a warm smile that Amara returned. A young man with wireless earbuds dropped into the seat beside the woman, barely looking up from his phone. All was calm, the usual pre-flight murmur acting as white noise as Amara reviewed her presentation one last time, then let herself enjoy the window view as the plane prepared for takeoff. That peace was shattered when a late passenger hurried into first class, a man around 50, with salt and pepper hair and an expensive suit marked by a rushed morning. His face flushed, his expression darkened as he scanned the row numbers. "Excuse me," he said, stopping at Amara's row and double-checking his boarding pass. "I believe you're in my seat." Amara looked up, briefly confused. She checked her ticket again. "Oh, this is 2A. The man, Richard Blackwell, though she didn't know his name yet, looked from the child to the boarding pass in her hand, his scowl deepening. "There must be a mistake. I specifically booked this seat." A flight attendant approached, sensing the tension. "Is there a problem here?" "Yes," Richard said before Amara could speak. "I believe there's been a seat assignment error," Amara spoke up, her voice clear though soft. "My boarding pass says 2A. It's the seat I reserved." The attendant, Sandra Miles, as her name tag read, gently took both boarding passes. Her face gave nothing away as she verified Amara's claim. "Miss Jenkins is correctly seated in 2A. Sir, let me check yours." Richard's jaw clenched visibly. "That can't be. I always book this seat on this route. Check again." Sandra scanned his pass with professional patience. "Mr. Blackwell, your assigned seat is actually 12C in economy." "Economy!" The word exploded from him with such fury that several nearby passengers looked up. "This is absurd. I've been a platinum member for 15 years. I never fly economy." "I understand your frustration, sir, but this needs to be resolved." Richard cut her off, voice rising. "I have an important meeting after we land. I need to work on this flight." Sandra maintained her professionalism. "I'm happy to check for any available first-class seats, but at the moment this cabin appears to be full." Richard turned his eyes on Amara, who sat quietly, fully aware of the scrutiny she was under from nearby passengers. His next words came slowly, deliberately. "Surely there's some flexibility here. Maybe the young lady wouldn't mind relocating. I doubt she needs the workspace as much as I do." The implication hung in the air, unmistakable in his condescending tone. Sandra's smile stiffened. "Sir, Miss Jenkins has a confirmed reservation for this seat. I can't ask her to move." "Come on," Richard whispered, leaning closer. "Be reasonable. Look at her. What is she, 10? 11? How important could her reason for being in first class possibly be?" Amara's face flushed. She'd been here before, dismissed, underestimated, but it never hurt less. She considered offering to switch just to end the rising tension, but her father's voice echoed in her mind. Never give up your rightful place just to make someone else comfortable with their prejudice. Before she could respond, another voice interrupted. The older woman across the aisle. "Excuse me," she said, her tone pleasant but firm. I couldn't help overhearing. "Perhaps I can offer my seat." The woman, elegantly dressed with neatly pinned silver hair, looked Richard directly in the eye, her gray gaze unflinching. That would resolve things, wouldn't it? The young lady keeps her assigned seat, and you still get to remain in first class. Richard hesitated, thrown by the unexpected intervention. "You're very kind, but that's not necessary." The woman continued smoothly. "Although I must say I'm curious why you believe the child's work in San Francisco is any less important than yours." There was a sharpness beneath her polite tone. After all, appearances can be deceiving. The other first-class passengers had fallen silent, watching. Richard looked around, suddenly aware of how things appeared. His expression shifted, calculation replacing indignation, as he realized the woman had offered him a graceful exit from an increasingly uncomfortable standoff. "You're very generous," he said finally, voice forced under control. "Thank you." As the woman stood and gathered her things, she introduced herself to Amara. "Elizabeth Montgomery. A pleasure to meet you, sweetheart. Amara Jenkins." "Thank you, Ms. Montgomery." Elizabeth waved off the thanks. "It's nothing. I prefer a window anyway." As they rearranged, Elizabeth now seated in the back, Richard settled into the aisle seat she'd vacated. Amara caught her father's anxious eyes from the economy section. She gave a slight nod to let him know everything was okay. Though the encounter had shaken her, she could still feel Richard's resentment from across the row, the weight of his assumptions and judgment. What Amara didn't know, what no one on Flight 1382 could know, was that this seemingly small dispute over a seat was merely the first domino in a chain of events that would uncover long-buried secrets, challenge deeply held beliefs, and ultimately force everyone involved to face truths about themselves they'd spent years avoiding. As the final passengers boarded and the crew prepared for departure, the real story of this flight was only just beginning to unfold. Filled with twists and reckonings no seasoned documentary writer could script. It was an epic of human will, a collision of justice and bias, and the power of a child's heart brave enough to dream big in a world stacked against her. The engines roared as Flight 1382 began taxiing toward the runway. Amara tucked her boarding pass into her tablet case, trying to shake off the lingering discomfort from the confrontation. Across the aisle, Richard Blackwell deliberately spread out his work documents, avoiding eye contact with the child he still believed didn't belong in first class. His face remained etched with contempt and smugness, the kind of entitlement passed down, not earned. In the economy, Marcus Jenkins kept a watchful eye forward. His attention split between the book in his hands and the occasional glimpse of his daughter just visible over the headrest. He had seen enough to understand what had just unfolded. One more entry in the long list of slights and prejudices they had encountered throughout Amara's extraordinary journey. "Excuse me?" A voice cut through his thoughts. "Is this seat taken?" Marcus looked up to see Elizabeth Montgomery standing in the aisle, pointing at the empty middle seat beside him. The same woman who had given up her first-class seat. "No, please," he said, shifting to make space. "Elizabeth Montgomery," she said as she sat. "Marcus Jenkins," he replied. "You did a good thing up there." Her eyes flickered in recognition of his name, but she simply said, "It just seemed like the simplest solution to an unnecessary problem." After a pause, she added more quietly, "Some people really don't like having their assumptions challenged." Marcus looked at her with renewed interest. "You didn't have to give up your seat." "Maybe not," she said. "But your daughter shouldn't have to defend her right to the one she paid for either." Her tone wasn't asking for thanks or recognition, just stating a principle, and Marcus felt the weight of it. In the economy cabin, Marcus and Elizabeth quickly found common ground in their love of engineering. His specialty in electrical systems, hers in structural design. Their conversation flowed easily, touching on careers, tech innovations, and eventually the unique challenges of raising a gifted child. "She's remarkable," Elizabeth said after Marcus shared a carefully edited version of Amara's achievements. "Though I imagine the road hasn't always been smooth." Marcus gave a restrained smile. "There have been hurdles, some expected, some not." "Let me guess," Elizabeth said. "Age, gender, race, take your pick." His tone was light, but the years of accumulated frustration showed in the tension around his eyes. "The tech world talks a big game about meritocracy, but people tend to see what they expect to see." Elizabeth nodded. "And treat people accordingly." Marcus was surprised by how precisely she'd captured it. "Exactly. Sometimes I think the hardest part of being her dad is teaching her how to navigate that reality without it chipping away at her sense of capability." As the plane lifted off, Detroit shrank below. In first class, Amara opened her tablet, reviewed her presentation one last time, then pulled out a sketchbook. She was researching haptic feedback tech for blind children, a breakthrough project. Richard, despite himself, was drawn to the complex diagrams. He had to admit, this wasn't an ordinary child. Suddenly, turbulence hit. A young woman rushed forward from the economy, Zoe Washington, Amara's COO. Ignoring the attendant's protest, Zoe steadied Amara with breathing techniques. When asked, "Are you her mother?" Zoe replied simply, "I work for her." The entire cabin fell silent. Richard was rattled. Who was this girl? The plane stabilized, but minds didn't. Richard began to wonder. Had he completely misjudged the situation? He leaned in and whispered, "Are you the Amara Jenkins?" When she nodded, he said quietly, "My nephew has dyslexia. Your Dreamscape platform changed his life. I owe you an apology." Just then, another flight attendant arrived and invited Amara to the cockpit, by request. Amara looked concerned. Marcus rose immediately to go with her. Inside, Captain Sullivan explained that an anonymous security alert had been received, claiming Amara was using fake documents and possibly being exploited for suspicious purposes. Orders from ground control. The plane must divert to Oakland for investigation. Marcus was furious. "This is racial profiling." Sullivan remained calm but firm. "I'm following security protocol." The anonymous call had come right after the seat dispute. Everyone understood what that meant. Richard was the obvious suspect. But without proof, nothing could be done. Amara returned to her seat, composed. Richard turned pale, realizing what he'd started. "Someone reported me for using fake documents," she said quietly. The whisper spread across the cabin. Anxiety and confusion rippled through the passengers. Marcus relayed the situation to Elizabeth and Zoe. Everyone felt the simmering outrage. The captain made the announcement. "We are diverting to Oakland for a security matter." Amara was no longer just a talented child. She had become the focal point of a situation that could alter the fate of her company, and a stark reminder of a painful truth. Sometimes, all it takes is one biased assumption to unravel justice. As the plane descended, the fallout from the anonymous call hung like a storm waiting to break. Secrets, poor decisions, and consequences no one expected were waiting on the ground. As Flight 1382 began its descent into Oakland International Airport, the atmosphere inside the cabin had completely shifted. What started as a routine morning flight was now tense to the point of suffocation. Passengers whispered to each other, stealing glances at Amara, who sat with her back straight and face calm, revealing nothing of the storm inside. In the economy, Marcus spoke urgently with Zoe. "Call Diane," he instructed, referring to their company's attorney. "Tell her what's happening and have her contact someone at the Oakland FBI office. We need to get ahead of this." Zoe nodded, already typing rapidly on her phone despite the electronics restrictions. As Dreamscape's COO, she was used to handling crises, though usually technical or financial ones, not personal attacks on the company's young founder. Next to them, Elizabeth Montgomery listened silently, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "You believe this was intentional?" she said. It wasn't a question, and it was a statement. Marcus glanced at her, weighing how much to share with this stranger who had shown unexpected kindness. If not, then it's a pretty massive coincidence. Indeed. Elizabeth's voice carried a tone Marcus couldn't quite place. Not exactly anger, not resignation, a complex blend of both. History has a way of repeating itself when we fail to recognize its patterns. Before Marcus could respond, the captain's voice came over the intercom again. "Flight attendants, prepare for landing." The landing at Oakland was smooth despite the circumstances. The aircraft touched down nearly silently before rolling toward a remote part of the airport, far from the main terminals. Through the window, Amara could see several official vehicles waiting. Airport security, police, even a suited FBI agent. "This is insane," Richard muttered from across the aisle, watching the scene unfold. "All this for a simple ID check?" Amara turned to him, her voice quiet but firm. "Nothing is simple when you're the one being questioned." Richard shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her gaze. His demeanor had transformed dramatically since learning who she was, from smug condescension to awkward remorse. But Amara took no satisfaction in the change. She'd seen it too many times before, respect only arriving after her accomplishments were revealed, as if her humanity alone wasn't enough to warrant basic courtesy. Amara and her father were escorted off the plane by FBI agent Tanya Rodriguez for identity verification. Meanwhile, Richard was confronted by Elizabeth Montgomery, the older passenger who had quietly observed everything and strongly suspected him of initiating the false alert. Richard deflected, but Elizabeth had seen enough of his behavior to know the real motive: bias, driven by race and power. Things escalated when the FBI received allegations of financial irregularities at Dreamscape. The investigation quickly shifted from a simple identity check to a full inquiry into alleged fraud. Marcus, Amara, and Zoe were escorted to the FBI's local office, where they faced a tense round of questioning from federal agents. At the FBI office, their attorney, Diane Chen, arrived with transparent financial documentation and a revelation. The allegations appeared to be part of a coordinated effort to sabotage minority-led tech companies. All signs pointed to TechCore Ventures, an investment firm Dreamscape had previously rejected for acquisition. The biggest twist, Elizabeth Montgomery, the woman who had given up her seat for Amara, was a former senior vice president at TechCore. But instead of being part of the conspiracy, she was its whistleblower. She had collected evidence from the inside and was now working with the government to expose TechCore's actions. Her presence on the flight had been intentional. She was there to observe, protect, and validate. Meanwhile, Richard Blackwell, who had made the anonymous security call, was consumed by guilt. He went to Amara's hotel to confess and brought with him a file of documents exposing how TechCore, through a shell firm called NextGen, where Richard worked, had orchestrated efforts to bring down Dreamscape. He admitted that what began as personal prejudice had spiraled into an action he now regretted deeply. Amara, composed as ever, accepted the information but didn't absolve him of responsibility. She reminded him that his actions were rooted in personal bias, not just corporate manipulation, and that children like her often paid the price for such assumptions. The next morning, the critical meeting with UNTC Ventures, a major investment firm, took place. Amara delivered a powerful presentation on Dreamscape's global expansion strategy, leaving a lasting impression on the board. Elizabeth, now revealed to be a member of UNTC's board, formally endorsed Dreamscape. UNTC approved full funding for the expansion plan, pledging both financial and public support. At the same time, the FBI announced the launch of a formal investigation into TechCore Ventures, based on Elizabeth's documents and Richard's testimony. The plot to undermine minority-led tech companies was exposed, and Dreamscape became a symbol of resilience and justice. 6 months later, Amara, now 12, took the stage at the launch event for Dreamscape's Global Access Initiative. Speaking to a crowd of hundreds, she declared that her journey was not just about technology, but about changing how the world treats those bold enough to dream big from disadvantaged beginnings. In the audience, Elizabeth and Richard sat quietly, witnessing the power of truth, redemption, and unshakable determination. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and subscribe to see more content like this. Where were you watching from? Let me know in the comments below.